Alright, so this should be working now, but I'm going to give it a minute anyway, and then I'm going to jump into what this video will be about, but the thumbnail I think will give it away as well. So that's fun. Okay, so everybody knows that the dice are loaded, everybody rolls with their fingers crossed, everybody knows the war is over, and everybody knows the bad guys lost. Everyone knows that in a few days, a giant war will begin in the game Politics and War. It is an open secret. And today I want to talk about why it's going to happen, how it's going to happen, what are some possibilities, and what each alliance gains and loses from this war. So this is probably the first type of video of its kind. Usually I make videos about wars after they've started or as they're starting. There's a lot of radios like on the Blitz, which is always interesting, or there's sometimes radios speculating about wars sort of abstractly, but this is like literally these people are going to fight, how is it going to happen, what are the scenarios. So it's a first in the community, I would say. I have 9 different scenarios listed down, and we're going to run through them and basically break them down first. So I'm going to switch this to Photoshop. Very cool. And we will have a look through. Yeah, global is going to happen. It'll happen on the... Is it the 18th? I need to check. It might actually be. It's in the next 48 hours. I know that. It's whenever the non-aggression pact ends from the last war. And that ties into why this is happening. Should I actually discuss that at all? Okay, very brief recap as to why this is going to happen. Specifically, like from leading from last war, there was a giant war between Singularity and the Syndicate, and then at the end of that war, basically the entire game got involved. The Knights Radiant and the Syndicate negotiated an end to the war, which made lots of spheres unhappy, and then as a result, there was a bunch of politics which led to a giant non-aggression pact, which I will discuss here on this giant sheet. 4 of these spheres, Rose, CIS, Well, and Sail, are in a giant non-aggression pact, so all of these guys aren't going to fight each other. And House and Penta were deliberately excluded. There's a bunch of politics that went into that, but it isn't too important for this conflict, strangely enough. The only important information to know is that these guys have a non-aggression pact, and these two do not. And so they are probably going to be the defenders in lots of these different scenarios. How do I want to do this, though? I've separated the sphere section differently. Oh no, okay, cool, I can make them disappear. And where do I start? We can start with scenarios. Yeah, well, depends on what sphere you're in, if your income goes away entirely. If you're in some of the neutral spheres, though, which presumably there'll be 1 or 2, then, or in most scenarios there's 1 or 2, then your income will go up because the food prices and resource prices will go sky high. Yeah, I'm just going to pull up my scenarios. So scenario 1 is everyone militarizes, there's some diplomatic magic, and then they demilitarize and farm until the nap ends. This is highly unlikely because militarization is expensive, and the non-aggression pact implied a war, so it's been in the works for a while. Like, for example, you wouldn't sign a non-aggression pact between 4 of the parties and then exclude 2 of them if you weren't planning a war. It's just counterintuitive. Option 2 is Well and House attack each other at the same time, and it's a coin flip who wins. And a lot of people, I think, a lot of people I've spoken to think Well is more competent, and I generally agree, but upsets can happen, and I've seen a few of them by now. I think we'll come to why Well and House specifically are going to fight each other later on, but that is the conflict, right? That's who's going to be fighting. Who's going to strike first? Huge mystery. It's kind of irrelevant. Who started it? in my view, but that is the war that's going to happen. So option 3 is House delays their attack, and as a consequence, guarantees a loss, right? As I said, this is an open secret. Everyone knows this war is going to happen. So they're both going to strike at exactly the same time, which is the moment that non-aggression pact ends. And yeah, one strategy that House could use is to actually delay their attack, right? If they expect to lose, there's some diplomatic value in being the overwhelmed defender, and they might try and leverage that into a revenge war in the future. And this option is also fairly unlikely. I think their general membership was saying stuff like this a month ago, and it got no traction, right? If there's no diplomatic value, there's no point using this strategy, and they are better served by doing as much damage as possible. So I've gone through 3 scenarios so far. These are the 3 basic scenarios. Nothing, either a coin flip or House loses. So Well is doing pretty well so far. Scenario 4, then you have House and Penta Force. Actually, what I would do is I will blank out the sides that aren't important, so you can actually see what the sides will be. So for the previous sections, it would have been, So this is what the conflict is probably going to be, but it could also include Penta. That's the 5th section, or the 4th up scenario. So House and Penta Force team up to fight well, and this would be a decisive victory for House and Penta Force. They would outnumber their opponent 2-1 in the high tier and have a slight advantage in the whale tier. And I will actually show you a visualization of that in like 2 seconds. Here we go. Because I have a cool ass stat tracking tool. Oh, wrong side. A, B, B. Cool. So there, you can see that House and Penta would have a slight advantage in most of the tiers and a huge advantage in this high tier. So yeah, let's switch back to the map and I will continue. Yeah, so this is fairly unlikely for reasons I'll address later when we think about people's interests. But this is still fairly likely. That's important to note. Alliances break the NAP. And right off the bat, I'm going to say this is unlikely. Alliances wouldn't have signed the Non-Aggression Pact only to break it immediately. And I'm sure this war was a topic broached in the Non-Aggression Pact negotiations, and it would have been resolved then. It must have been. I don't think it's logical that they wouldn't have. But this could possibly look like a sail, or even like a rose, or something else, either supporting one side or the other, and it's not terribly clear which. In a scenario where someone breaks the NAP, it's anyone's game. So for example, if Sail hit Eclipse, could CIA... and regardless, there's a chance one or more signatories break the Non-Aggression Pact, and this is interesting because it wouldn't necessarily invalidate the entire NAP. This is a multilateral treaty with no primary signatory. So for example, if Sail hit Eclipse, could CIS or Rose defend them? My assumption is that without a treaty to Eclipse, the answer is no. Now, if that's the case, any of the big alliances could dramatically affect the outcome of this war at the price of their diplomatic credibility. Non-aggression pacts are one of the few things that are kind of like sacrosanct. You can't violate them. They're the predicate of almost all diplomacy in PNW. Right? You win a war, you get a non-aggression pact, you have that amount of time to do your diplomacy, to fix your econ, to do anything else. Of course, people will proxy each other, but the moment one of those non-aggression pacts is broken, the game will completely devolve, and you'll have alliances not rebuilding from wars, and then signing a non-aggression pact, and then immediately attacking their opponent to ruin their rebuild. It will get ugly very fast. So, yeah, there's incentive not to do this. And of course, they'd be gambling that the other signatories would hold to the word of the treaty or share their view. So, if, for example, I think my example was Sail. Yeah, if Sail hit well and defended House and Penta, or if do another example, if Rose helps out and like hits Penta or something. In one of these types of scenarios, then the rest of the game would have to go. Actually, that's incorrect. How would this work? Oh, I guess it would have to be on well because they're a signatory. Okay, never mind. If Rose or Sail, God forbid, CIS, hit well and in defense of House, right, then they'd be breaking the non-aggression pact, and they would be relying that Rose and Sail would not immediately attack them, right? They could say, well, the non-aggression pact has been broken. Sure, it's a multilateral treaty. Sure, you haven't broken it with us, but you did break it, and therefore we're going to attack you. So it's a huge gamble, in my view, and it seems fairly unlikely. Remove them. Okay. And we will go to scenario 6. So Well and House attack each other while another top 10 alliance attacks Penta Force. And there are a few different ways this could come about. And I will show that too. 1 second. Okay. So if Penta is planning to defend House, then Eclipse just needs to recruit one other top 10 alliance to take them out. Now, if Penta annoyed any of the other spheres, then it's possible they were excluded from the NAP, so they could be attacked by one of the signatories. And if Penta militarized defensively, then Eclipse might still get another alliance to act as a contingency. The problem with a contingency plan is it's expensive, and that other alliance has to militarize, and the whole time they'll be thinking, we could just beat them, right? It's roughly the same cost anyway. So that's actually one of the more likely outcomes, and it's a particularly tricky one for Penta. And I'll get into this in the next section to do with interests and why each alliance is doing what they're doing. But I think that is one of the more worrying options for the game at large as well, because Penta comprises a significant chunk of the mid-tier. So if they get obliterated either by their own choice or by someone else's, that's not terribly good for game health, though they also have been sort of outside of politics for a while, so there's nuance to that argument. But yeah. Scenario 7, right? So Well attacks House, and then after they've won militarily, they attack Penta. And I think this would require a leak or some big blunder during the Well versus House war. And I think the political cost of chaining a war and dogpiling a smaller sphere is too high unless they were planning to get involved or take revenge or something. Yeah, so it would require a serious big leak in that war. Even if, for example, I think Gato was plotting to roll the entire game, and like that came out in the leaks. It didn't, I don't think, but even if they had that, I don't think that would be enough. I think you would need like a significant number of leaks from multiple alliances in their sphere to say that this was like this was the intention of the whole, and that a preemptive attack was absolutely necessary. It's a very high bar, so I don't think this is too likely, but it could happen. Everyone in the NAP attacks House and Penta Force, and scenario 8 is everyone in the NAP attacks House and Penta Force, and this isn't going to happen. The temptation to dodge the war and outgrow some of your competitors is far too large. And the final scenario that I have listed down, scenario 9, is House attacks another sphere at the same time as Well attacks them. And this guarantees a loss, but it splits the economic damage across two spheres and increases it a bit, because that extra sphere will need to stay militarized for the duration of the war, rather than demilitarizing at some point. And this would be very effective, but I think it's contrary to their interests, which we'll tackle in the next section. So yeah, that's another option. Like, for example, House could attack Rose, and that will mean that Rose takes a bunch of initial military damage, and then also they have to stay militarized, and they lose a bunch of money from nukes. And House only has a finite number of nukes and missiles, so the damage will be split 50-50 between well, in this example, Rose. But it will increase the total damage slightly, just slightly in their favor. We'll continue on to the interest section. But first, has anyone got any big questions? I doubt any of the alliances would risk ruining diplomatic reputation. I agree, there's actually very little incentive to damage your reputation from any of the parties right now. All of them are actually kind of not desperate, but they do need to protect their reputation. Which is quite interesting, because I never used to put that much stock in political reputation in this game, because to some extent it's too many alliances are realpolitik for that to matter, and the only time it does is when they're like sort of blacklisting alliances or making them persona non grata. But yeah, in this case there's actually incentives to being well liked, or to being less hated, as some people in this game would say. But actually, let's take a look at tiering based on some of the scenarios. I think I was planning to do it on each scenario, but I guess we can just take a look at it now. So yeah, this is one scenario, which is with Penta and House combined. This is just House versus Well, so it's basically a 50-50 if it's just the two of them. That's why I said it's a coin flip. I think Well has a slight advantage in the whale tier, like I think they have more city 50s or whatever, and House has like more city 45s. It's something like that. So they have a slight advantage, but it's almost 50-50. It would very much depend on the day. And these lower tiers really don't matter for this conflict. It will be decided, I don't want to say at 30 plus, but not really. Even like 40 plus, I think, is more accurate. What did I say as other scenarios though? Oh yes, but if there was like a non-aggression pact break, then pretty much any of the spheres also flip it in House's favor pretty decisively. I'm trying to think. Well, if you have some sort of double action where like Penta and House combine and then another party also joins with Eclipse, it's a clear victory for Eclipse as well. Penta is just too weak by itself, and the non-aligned alliances, I don't think they actually make a difference either, because they're mainly concentrated in the lower tier. Okay, they make a tiny difference, but yeah, not as much as you'd expect. There are a few non-aligned alliances that are noteworthy. I would say the Lost Mines. I think I put World Task Force as non-aligned or unaligned, and House Stark, stuff like that. They're kind of wild cards. I'm not sure what House Stark would do though specifically, because I think they were sympathetic to House in public, but they're also allied to Well. So my inclination would be to say that they, at the very least, wouldn't be on House's side, and they would probably be neutral. Yeah, let's continue. What am I thinking? Oh, also interesting to check out raw city count. I'm not 100% sure this is still accurate, but I tried to make it as accurate as I could. So as you can probably see from here, Sail and Well are kind of leading. They have more cities than anyone else, like City 11 Plus. And these three spheres, Rose, Well, and Sail, are also like the main upper tier alliances. House is also up there, and CIS and Penta Force are well behind. Penta Force is basically like not even a low tier alliance. They're just a very weak low tier sphere. They're just a very weak sphere in general, unfortunately. And then CIS is slightly better than Penta, and then these guys are all way ahead. And Rose is basically like an alliance masquerading as a sphere. The Guardian exists, but you wouldn't know if you didn't see them on the Treaty Web. But let's continue. let's continue. Yeah, so interests. So where can I switch this to? Cool. So we've run through different scenarios, and you'll probably notice that some alliances seem pressured into decisions, specifically Penta Force. So they have a few options, but they're all high risk and low reward. Whereas alliances like Syndicate, which should be big players, are barely mentioned. So I want to list a variety of interests which give us insight into why alliances will make some decisions and not others. So we'll start with Well. Why is it in their interest to fight House? Well, it's because most of the City 40 plus nations are concentrated in their two spheres. They're natural enemies. Furthermore, which one of them has the momentum or more wins will be able to recruit more large nations. What about House? Well, I think it's in their interest. I think their interest is in avoiding losses until they are in the right position to defeat Eclipse, and that requires good relations with the other spheres, so they can peel them away from Eclipse or use them to take it down. And another short-term interest is just doing as much damage as possible to them in this war. So that gives a pretty clear indication as to why this is happening, just on its face. Like, you can go into the nuances of Last War or the peace between it, but at the end of the day, really the reason why this is happening, from the public members' perspective, and it's why everyone knows it, is that there are only... Here we go. Okay. Out of all these spheres, which of them can fight each other? Rose, CIS, Well, and Sail cannot. Well, okay then, which alliances can take on House and Penta? Right, anyone can take on Penta, that's easy. Which of them can take on House? Well, Sail might be able to, but it would actually be kind of a challenge, because that upper tier, like Grumpy, is particularly powerful. CIS, no shot. They're too weak in the high tier. Rose, it's not really in their nature. Like, if you look at the trend of the types of wars they fight, it just seems highly unlikely. And so that kind of leaves Eclipse and Well as the only real option. And they've been fighting, I think, 3 wars with House back to back. 2 or 3, yeah. So there's a lot of reason to suspect that. And I don't think we're in for any surprises, really. But yeah, let's continue on with some other interests. So House's interests interact strangely with Penta, because on the one hand, they want to drag them in so that more damage is dealt to Eclipse, and they remain in the same war cycle. And for the concept of war cycling, it's very like specific to PNW. So, for example, let's say House is rolled this month, and then Penta is rolled in 2 months. Well, House will be rebuilding when Penta gets attacked, and vice versa for the next year, because you need like a month after your war to repair your infrastructure, and then get a return on investment so you can rebuild in the future after next war. And then you need another at least 2 months to actually build cities and grow and keep up with your rivals. So if, and wars as well only last about a month. I could probably display this on the Google Sheet, just to illustrate it even more clearly. Actually, this is kind of zoomed out. I wonder if you could even see the numbers before. We'll bump it up to like 200. Okay, so say we'll do 6-month period, right? So let's say that the war begins here, right? So House gets rolled here, right? And then House rebuilds, and then House is growing, and they do again. Now, if Penta does it at the exact same time, actually, we just do this. There we go. So if they fight at the same time, their war periods, their war cycles are synced, right? But if Penta doesn't help them, they'll still end up fighting a war in the next few months, and then they will be out of sync. And this really hurts them because it means that it'll take almost a year to get their cycles back in sync, unless one of them takes a huge loss, right? And that just prevents them catching up to their rivals meaningfully, because then House would have to rebuild again. So they just lose 2 months of growth. Yeah, whereas if they... Yeah, okay. Never mind. I've messed that up. But the point is that is the purpose of a war cycle. You're basically just trying to stay in sync with each other. I'm gonna zoom back out. Cool. Okay, so this is a good reason to get Penta involved, but if they get Penta involved, that hurts Penta's economy, and it will make Penta less useful later, when they try and less useful in trying to take down Eclipse later. I'm just going to reread that because I messed that up. I do have roughly a script, but it ends at some point, and there's just some sort of slight bullet notes, which is probably why I'm talking slightly faster. But I don't want this to be an hour-long video. I digress. So this is a good reason to get Penta involved, but if they get Penta involved, that hurts Penta's economy, and it will make Penta less useful in trying to take down Eclipse later. They're already the smallest block. So any economic damage on them is magnified. But what about Penta, right? They're getting pulled in different directions, but what is their interest? Primarily, they just want to grow because they are woefully behind. If one top 10 alliance can wreck their sphere on a whim, they are in deep trouble. Secondarily, they want to get involved and act as a power broker, or to get a political deal that will benefit them. So Penta is by its nature, Penta is, by its nature, as a middle rank block, destined for a very short lifespan. I actually just realized I'm showing this. Okay, never mind. Switching back. I keep getting lost. I should be taking this more slowly. Anyway, Penta is by its nature as a middle rank block, destined for a very short lifespan. So the alliances in it are probably thinking more about themselves and their money and their influence, their goals, rather than as a permanent fixture in the game. Rather than being a sphere that will last for a year, they're a sphere that's going to last probably 6 months. And when it shatters, they'll each be trying to try and get the best deal they can and survive. Alliances like UPN and Gato, they've been left alone, they've been abandoned by the top 50 time and time again. So they'll be very, very sensitive to that, and they won't really want to jump into a war without a deal. And they're going to have very defined interests, whereas something like Mayhem, One Name Withheld, wants to work with big alliances, so they'll be way more inclined to fight and to act and to make those deals as well. So UPN has no dog in this fight, as that's another concept as well. That UPN sort of doesn't have good relations with either sphere, but Name Withheld, which was a TKI ally for half of a decade, probably does have more interest. So what about the two silent spheres, Rose and Sail? And I just realized I'm moving so quickly because I actually have something written down for once that I'm not even updating my sheet. Let's try and switch back to that. Cool. So yeah, what about the two silent spheres, Rose and Sail? Well, they have been remarkably quiet throughout the build-up to this war, and the reason is very simple. They are going to grow. Rose's economy is the GOAT, and this gives them more time to pull ahead as the strongest individual alliance. On the flip side, Sail is the largest sphere, and if Well and House take each other out, there's not that many ways to beat them. Yeah, so that wraps up most of them. CIS. So CIS is in a similar position, and I will bring them up on the map too. Cool. Actually, I'll bring up all these three because they're in a similar position. Yeah. So, yeah, CIS is in a similar position to both of these spheres, but their economy is slightly worse. So another interest is just catching up, like Penta. And before I start winging it entirely, I'd like to start to say this is why I like non-aggression pacts. Aside from like the horrors of the script so far, yeah, they give alliances time to call their shots and do public or not so secret diplomacy. And we all know what the alliances want to do and what their options are. And because of this, we can influence them. For the next 24 hours, hell, the past week, you can try and influence your alliance and your sphere. And I'm not as involved in PNW diplomacy anymore, but when asked for my opinion, I kind of tended towards Penta. You know, I think we're in a rough position. You know, we're small, we're like catching up to the rest of the game. We have no dog in this fight. Have fun, right? It'll be very entertaining. We can make stuff, make content out of it. I don't know if my ideas will be listened to. We're more of a team. Yeah, it's interesting. And I've heard some people that are on the flip side of that, both in our camp and in others. I've heard from people in Penta that say, oh, we must fight. And I've heard from people in Rose that say we must fight. And I've heard from people in, I think, Legion that were even saying, like, dude, we want to be at peace for the next 3 years. Like, we want to chill. So the game is actually remarkably diverse in its opinions. And in the interests of both individual players and alliances. And it's often taken for granted, I think. People say that, like, intra-alliance, the internal diplomacy is very boring, and that's just incorrect. That's probably the most interesting diplomacy in the game. And aside from that, people say, well, sphere diplomacy is solved, right? They're just acting as these sort of coordinated wholes. And I say, well, no, not entirely, right? UPN's perspective in Penta is a wildly different perspective from the Black Knights. And even within, not within, intersphere diplomacy is also very nuanced, I think. For example, I said like Camelot is in a very similar position, I think, to some of the alliances in Penta Force. Right? I was talking to Black Knights a few months ago. I said, if on a bad day, EVH decided to roll the entirety of Penta Force and then TGH and Camelot and Dark Brotherhood, they could do it. If no other alliance interceded, they could do it. The material power was there. That is how great the gap had become. And so those mid-tier alliances are sensitive to that, and they're trying to monitor their position in the game and trying to improve it. And to some degree, collaborating where possible, but also sabotaging each other, because despite the similar positions in terms of material power, those alliances also have very storied like histories. I think, for example, within that Black Knights Camelot relationship, there are people in Black Knights that completely despise Camelot for ancient history. And there are people in Camelot that go, those Black Knights guys are cowards. You know, they run away from wars. You know, they're not that good anymore. They're old dogs. So there's a variety of opinions, and it's all really interesting in these types of conflicts. And I'm looking forward to this immensely, because even though it seems obvious, right, and everyone in the game is just saying, well, and how's it going to fight? There are a number of different scenarios, right? This could go a variety of different ways, even if, like, nothing interesting happens. Nothing interesting. House and Well is still a coin flip. It could be that on the day, House wins. The numbers are there, right? It's almost 50-50. It's almost it's a 3 to 4% difference in terms of total strength. It's very small. In the high tier, where like the war will be determined. The perception of competence, right? The people say, Eclipse and KT are way more competent than their opponent, I think is over-exaggerated a lot of the time. Like, the Immortals hasn't fought a war in a year and a half, right? The presumption would be that they are terrible fighters now. I don't exactly have that opinion. We've seen alliances that haven't fought for a very long time come out and do remarkably well. like exceptionally well. So it's possible that the Immortals has been doing like tons of community events or been training, or they've just changed dramatically as an alliance in that year, and they're going to come out and perform like no one's ever expected. It could be that Sword Coast, which is mostly Rose people, to my understanding. It could be they come out and shock us all as well. Or it could be that KT or WAP or somehow LOD way overperform. Like, even though they're regarded as like remarkable military alliances, it could be they perform even better than expected. And they dramatically change the shape of the game because of that. Or the balance of powers. So that's a bunch of stuff that I'm thinking about, and why it's why I'm going to enjoy this conflict. There'll be even more discussion of this, particularly how it goes down, and sort of what people think about it in a radio on the Orbis Inquiry Discord, which I'll put in the description or something at the end of this video, the recording. But yeah, what else is there to discuss briefly? I don't want to make this long. I wanted to recap it as quickly as possible, which is why I sort of stumbled over my words as I went through the rough draft of a script. Does anyone have any questions? That's the important part. I should be... You know, next time, I'm going to pace myself and drink way less coffee. I think that will solve many problems. I have 10 people watching now. Probably from the shock of someone actually trying this and explaining a war before it happens. Like, I'm gonna get so many people like messaging me and saying, "How could you? This was OPSEC." Was it? Was it really? I don't think so. It's not my opinion that it is. I'll actually highlight all of these now. We could look at numbers, actually, while we're here. Where is this? Cool. Imagine if this, like, somehow avoided it. That would be amazing. It would be so entertaining, wouldn't it? Alternatively, you know, we get dropped for spoiling it. And then we, like, pick a side and go, like a raging Viking. Go to Valhalla in style. But yeah, let's continue with... let's look at some stats. Actually, like, what are we continuing with it? Let's look at some stats and have some fun before I call an end to this. Where is Eclipse and Grumpy? I was looking at that earlier, or I was talking about that earlier, and saying that one of them had a slight advantage. Okay, so here it is, right? So Eclipse has a slight advantage at like City 47 that I don't think anyone else really matches. But like it's not a huge difference. I'm trying to think. Where is TKR in this? I'm hiding them. Yeah, TKR has like a couple nations that sort of come close. Yeah, it looks like very much a 50-50 all the way up. I personally think it's a coin toss. Like, it's very easy to say, like, Eclipse is better. But when, like, it comes down to the Blitz, even remarkably active people, like people that are on 24/7, sometimes they just can't make it, right? There's the meme of, like, the anime truck that just takes people out. But it could also be, it could be health, it could be family, it could be anything. It could be bad Wi-Fi. So it's impossible to know. And what else could we look at? I have a sheet that does City 40, and I actually kind of want to do, I kind of want to do 45 plus because that's probably more interesting. Oh no, I have 45. I'm done. Okay, here we go. Yeah, so Grumpy actually kind of outpaces Eclipse in some areas. At least in terms of raw nations above 45. That is interesting. Yeah, if you just look at 40, like it is such an insane gap now. I think the entirety of Penta Force has like 4 or 5 nations at that tier. They're outcompeted by ARG. Even the macros just like it seems ridiculous to say was Event Horizon could take out the entirety of Penta and then Cam and then TGH. But if you look at the City 40 plus tier, that is not an exaggeration in the slightest. And the way that conflicts happen, like the high tier very much decides a lot of wars. It shouldn't at this point, like the mechanics have changed, but for whatever reason it still is. Does anyone else have any questions though? About how this is going to play out that I can reveal so far to my limited knowledge? I'm going mainly off public speculation. I didn't think I could even attempt to make this video because to some degree you have like private information which you're given, so you can kind of predict what will happen, like with a reasonable certainty. And then I was talking to Legion of Dawn people in public chats, and they were like, yeah, no, we're gonna fight and we're gonna win. I was like, okay then, I guess if people just aren't hiding what's gonna happen, I guess I might as well. I guess I might as well make a video out of it. It really is such a unique scenario that, you know, a non-aggression pact has given birth to this type of diplomacy and this type of event. We should have more of them. I kind of want more non-aggression pacts now. Because if every non-aggression pact ended like this, where everyone sort of knew what was happening and everyone was trying to like influence the events before it happened, that'd be kind of cool. That would be awesome. The only disappointing part, I think, is that 4 of the spheres are all non-aggression. They have this giant non-aggression pact with each other. What we should have in future, I think, if we try and like, if we could play God, it would be to have bilateral non-aggression pacts. So say like, we'll pull back the chart back up. If, for example, Rose and Sail had a non-aggression pact, and CIS and Penta had a non-aggression pact, or like Well and House had a non-aggression pact, and they were all going to fight on exactly the same day, somehow, then I don't know, that would be cool, right? Like, well, one of these non-aggression pacts is just longer than the others, right? So they all sign like a 6-month non-aggression pact, and then Well and House sign like a 7-month, and CIS and Penta sign a 8-month or something. Like, we have that slight discrepancy, so that way they all attack at the same time, but how they combine is all up in the air until it happens. So that'd be really cool. But it's difficult to do, and this is probably the best we'll get for quite a while. I want to talk a bit about like leader diplomacy or like the interests of individual players, but as much as I know some, I kind of don't know much. I think Vanes has been like in charge of Eclipse forever. TKR's leadership changed recently. I think they were trying to repair relations with a bunch of people. I heard that a bit, and then I also heard that they just weren't doing that at all, and they were doing the opposite because they kept flaming people on the forums. So I kind of don't know what they're doing. I heard Tyrion came back to TI, which could be a huge change in their diplomacy, but that could have well been over 8 months ago. I'm rather behind on the times in PNW. I don't really know what's going on with Penta either internally. My assumptions of like UPN and Name Withheld and stuff are very much based on what you can see publicly, right? The Name Withheld allied to TKF for 5 years, then left. I don't know how they like broke that off. It could be they parted on great terms. It could be they're on terrible terms now, and I'm completely like misjudging them, and they're gonna like join on the side of like Eclipse or something. It's entirely possible that one of these or all of these scenarios are wrong, and that there'll be a completely new and unique scenario just to spite me. So yeah, that'll be fun. I don't even know who's leading Rose right now. Damn. I couldn't even guess. Actually, I spoke to the last leader of Rose, so I don't even know. Yeah, I completely at a loss. I'm gonna find out now. Let's see. It's kind of ridiculous that I don't know who's leading the largest alliance in the game. Oh, it's Lucianus. Did he come back? Or did he replace the last guy? Oh, I know that would be the same. Either he remained leader, or he became leader after the last guy, or he was leader before the last guy came in, then he came back. I have no clue. Their politics confuses me. I didn't even know Kurdenek was this high. Oh, Vex retired. Ah. Chromelian is a former member of Camelot, so it's kind of crazy to see how far he's risen up the ranks. They're completely different rows from like a year ago. Anyway, I'm getting off track. Is there any other major events I can talk about? Not really. When is Rose being taken out of 1? Oh, so this is, I think I talked about this in a previous video, but it's the space race. Whoever came up with that name is brilliant. But yeah, the top 5 alliances are basically competing for rank 1. Rose is, they're 1.5 million score now. That is insane. I thought they were still at 1.2. It's because of the militarization. They'll probably be the first to 2 mil. I could see them getting 2 mil by year's end. That is obscene. Okay. My guess is that Eclipse will be set back by this war. So they'll fall to like, or they won't fall, but I'm trying to remember what that peacetime score is. I think it's about 1 million. So I think Rose will maintain its lead by like 200,000 or 300,000. And they will even extend that to like 400,000 because of this war. But Event Horizon is going to close the gap with Eclipse in this peace cycle as well. So they'll be roughly the same score. And Event Horizon will probably have a pretty good shot at overtaking Rose. I'd say within 6 months to a year. I think Event Horizon has a pretty good shot of beating Rose. I would say a better shot than Eclipse does because of how the membership is distributed. I'll bring up the tiering chart so you can actually see it. Yeah, so here we go. So Event Horizon and Eclipse. Actually, I can pull up the Alliance sim because it just simplifies it. Is that displaying correctly? Okay, yeah, good. So this is why. When Eclipse is boosting their people, right? So they'll get these city 16 nations or whatever to like city 20 within the next like 6 months. But these city 35s, they're only going to get to like city 38, 39 or whatever. So they're not actually going to move up that much. Whereas Event Horizon will move up their like city 20s to like city 30 by that time. Like it's purely because the cost of cities is cheaper at the low end than the high end. And a lot of these people between like 12 to 15, they'll flake out. Like they're not going to reliably grow. A lot of these mid-tier people, though, are actually fairly well proven. And Event Horizon just has more of them. So I would think Event Horizon has a better chance of beating Rose right now. In terms of raw score, than anyone else, but Event Horizon is probably also the weakest of the alliances in the space race, with the exception of maybe the Immortals. TKR is way more of like a venerable alliance. They're more experienced, they're wealthier, my guess would be, than Event Horizon. Eclipse has a huge upper tier that Event Horizon doesn't have too. Yeah, Event Horizon I think is probably one of the weaker of the top 5 alliances. The only reason I'm placing them above the Immortals is because their tax system is slightly better than the Immortals. But that's a judgment call. The Immortals has a year of peace, and Event Horizon has only had a few months. So the Immortals could like swing another 6 months or 8-month peace, if like they have some diplomatic trick to doing that. I don't think Event Horizon could though. Yeah. So what are the odds someone beats Rose this year? I'd say it's like 30% chance. Next year, I would say almost certainly someone could overthrow Rose in terms of raw score. It's still quite a challenge, though. In terms of, I think, tiering, Event Horizon isn't that bad. Yeah, I would say it's just, in terms of money and experience, I think they are actually a bit behind. Yeah, that's my guess. I think that's probably everything then. This might be the first time I'm going to end on a high note. I'm going to end with 8 viewers. I don't. I'm already tripping up over my words. I do not need any more weird I don't know how to say liquids. And I don't need to put anything else in. Would it be better for an alliance to have 30 whales or 100 city 5s? 30 whales. 100%. You have to define whale. Because 100 city 5s is only 500 cities. Whereas if you have 30 whales with 30 cities, I think that's like 600 cities? I might be totally wrong, but it's something like that. If you do 40 cities, yeah, it's just clearly in favor of the whales. And I don't even know about that anymore. I think the whales are like city 45 now. I'll pull up the stats very briefly before we call an end to this. Cool, so we're going to pull up city 10. Wow, that's amazing. Cool. So city 10 to 20 was considered like the low tier before, but I actually don't think it's even really the low tier because they've removed city timers. So like most people can get to 20 within 6 months. So I would say that, or not even 6 months, within like a month or 2 you can get to city 20. So I'd actually say that city 20 to 30 is the low tier, 30 to 40 is the mid tier, and then 41 plus is the whales. And that actually makes more sense with the distribution, right? The whales were always this rather small section of the game. If you were talking like 2017 onwards, then the whales were actually only this section of the game, right? Like not even 40 plus, but just this small section. Yeah, but if you take it from city 10, then you can say city 10 to 20 is low tier, city 20 to 30 is mid tier, city 30 to 40 is high tier, and 41 plus is whale. Yeah, so it's just adding high tier, as if you wanted to distinguish whales from high tier. But I don't think that distinguishment is very important nowadays. If you're on none, you will never become a whale, purely because whale is it's a relative term. So you're competing with people that can literally farm forever with no war. Or virtually no war. So I don't love your odds. Like, even if you were just a one-man alliance, then you'd actually be able to deposit your resources and like trade them and loan them and stuff. So you'd be in a much better position as well. What are you at, Uriah? I thought you were at Are you at 40 now? I know that Singularity only has like 3 city counts. It's like City 20, City 33, and City 40. Nah, it won't happen. That's just it's rough, but it's true. If you're in none, you won't get there. There's lots of things you can do from none, which are really unique, I think. But no one's like really been able to pull off that playstyle. Yeah, not quite a whale yet. You got to get that one extra city, then you'll be a whale. Don't worry, it'll only take 6 months for the Singularity city circles to get around to it. They gotta bring the rest of your alliance up there as well. I'm trying to think what you could do from none. You could do a lot more raiding from none, I think. If I was starting out new and I had to be on none, or if I wanted to have fun with a nation on none, I think you could build up a pretty strong reputation. If you were a really good raider, you were really good, and you never joined an alliance, you unofficially got into some alliances, discords and stuff, well, I think you could build up like quite an amazing reputation of just being like a random fighter, like mercenary figure. Like there's a playstyle to be had there, but the amount of skill that it requires vastly exceeds anything that you could acquire in that playstyle, right? So you'd have to join an alliance, learn all these things, become exceptionally skilled in 1 or 2 areas, and then try it and re-roll to do it. And then even then, it would take you like a year or 2 to like figure out how to do it really well. And the game may well be dead by then. And relative to what you could accomplish in a bigger alliance, it's not as impressive. Like 1 or 2 years, you could be leader of like a top 5 alliance. Yeah, I mean, 100% tax is insane. I mean, you can. Yeah, I mean, a year ago, Singularity was like a City 20 alliance. Camelot was like a City 10 alliance. You go up like 10 or 12 cities with high taxes in a very short space of time. And I know some people would say, well, you get a city a month anyway, so like that's not that impressive. Lots of members drop out. Lots of people, like, there's wars that you fight or raids that you deal with. In low tax alliances, it's very easy to just be held back like 6 months with like a few bad decisions or random chance. So like consistent growth no matter what is actually very impressive. Damn, Firewolf has more cities than I do. That is the one downside of high taxes, is you're stuck at the whims of the people that are distributing the cities. Even when you're the one distributing the cities, you can still fall behind. Yeah. I don't do as much distribution anymore. I do a little bit of planning, but not much. High taxes is relatively easy to plan with. You basically pick a goal and then like you work towards it. Okay, we're gonna call it. We're gonna end it because I don't want the stream to go over an hour, because like 1 hour videos are very scary, and I'm sure it decreases my overall watch time. But yay, celebrate. You were here when the first character or whatever in the community predicted a global war. Yay! Amazing. I'll pop into the Inquirer voice chat if people want to talk. But yeah. Cool. See ya.